Welcome to Unlock Your Retirement. I'm your co-host, Tony Shore, and I'm here with our host. He's the man with the plan. We've been having a great time chatting before the show. Bruce Smith is here, and Bruce with WealthKare, you've got a great show lined up for us today. But before we get into that, what have you been doing? Life's been busy for you, right?
Oh yeah, life is, it's like everybody else. It's really funny. I've been doing this 40 years, and it's funny, you're doing late life, pre-retirement planning, retirement planning, and you hear all the stories. Well, guess what? I'm kind of at that age now where, the grandkids are not babies anymore. They're 9 and 6, and they're student of the month. They're high honor roll. They're doing very well. Lily fell and broke her foot.
Oh, yeah.
So she's been in a boot, and she was on one of those buggies that you put your knee on because you can't put weight on it. And I can only imagine what that's like for a 9-year-old. I mean, I know, boy, I just that just wouldn't have worked for me. I'd have been done all kind of stupid stuff. But she's done well. Went to the doc, and they got her off of the little cart buggy thing, so now she can walk on it with the boot for 2 more weeks. You go through all life's things, and you look at retirement. Mrs. Smith still putting up with me after 44 years. Um, I mean, I've said it many times on this show. The only way to sainthood is you've got to do a miracle, and she has been a miracle in my life without question. But no, we've been busy, we've been crazy. Business is good. Clients, our coffee with client events have coffee with friends events. I'm sorry, have just been phenomenal, and we've met a lot of new people because our clients bring friends of theirs to join us for our coffee with friends events, which are purely educational. So yeah, a lot of good things happening. The team's doing good. Bruce and Chris are kind of they're starting to realize they've been doing this 20 years. And every time they complain about it, I say, well, I've been doing it for 40 years. So sorry, you get no sympathy here. But
I think that's great that you have your son Bruce working there with you and the crew. You have a great team over at WealthKare. And for our listeners out there, before we jump into our topic for today, let them know how they can get a hold of you and the team there if they want to set up a no charge, no obligation consultation.
yeah, we make it easy. If you're doing the telephone thing, it's 888-888-5601. If you're doing it online, you can go to discoverunlock.com and schedule your complimentary consultation with us. It's funny you bring up the guys, and the one thing we're hearing more and more, and I think this is a sad commentary on the financial industry, is we have a lot of people that have come to us, especially this year, and they're telling us because ever since COVID, there's been a giant upheaval of people moving and shifting and retiring and getting out of the financial services industry. And I think, as you well know, the industry is in a way kind of shrinking. They're saying, where are we going to get the advisors we need for the future with this giant wealth transfer? And they hear us on the air, they've heard the show, and they come in and see us and they meet us, and they're like, hey, not only do you have unique strategies that we're not finding anywhere else, but you have absolute concrete continuity. So yes, we can deal with you, Bruce, but Chris or Bruce are involved in those meetings, and they're like and it's not just a new advisor that you're being handed off to. They've been there 20 years. So your plan, when we put it into place, it stays in place, it stays active, it stays in the right position, and that the people that are managing it, because we manage as a team. So it was a concept we started in '96. And then as they came on board, we integrated everything, and it's really worked out well. But the clients, today they're looking for that stability. They're looking for those keys. So yeah, to reach out to us, 888-888-5601 or discoverunlock.com. And we'd love to talk to you. Hear your situation. There's no products, no pressure, and no major crazy discussions. We want to know more about you and have a conversation. That's where it all begins.
Yeah, and I know you've been doing this a long time. You already mentioned that 40 years, which you must have started
Thank
when
you
you were.
for repeating that, Tony. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
you must have started when you were 10. Let's just add that. But I know that you love talking with people, and that's one reason you do the show. But you love it when our listeners and viewers call in with questions. comments. They want to get something lined up. And I know you and your team handle everything retirement related, and especially focusing on making sure that they have a financial plan in place for retirement and an income plan in place. And we're going to get into that more, but I just really encourage them to give you a call, go to the Discover Unlock site and set up that consultation, right?
Yeah, and I'm pumped about today's program because actually, for our listeners, this is your program. So this what we did, we're kind of approaching the end of the year. My God, it's coming fast. And so what we did is we kind of the questions, the main thrust that we hear that people are concerned about, and we take notes. Today actually we use an actual note taker as part of all of our appointments. And Bruce and Chris are so appreciative of that because it's not my scribble on a piece of paper. And then they say, "What did you mean here?" And I kind of go, "I'm not even sure." And I go, "You can't even read your own writing. How are we supposed to be mind readers?" So we kind of we take stock and what are the things people are concerned with? Why do they come to an advisor? So today's show, we're going to be hitting a lot of the key points that are the questions you, the listeners, and people who have come to work with us have said this is their biggest concerns. So we're glad to address them on the air. And if you're having those thoughts and concerns, and you say, "Hey, these guys sound like they feel my pain. So let's find a way to solve that pain and try to make it as painless as possible and maximize the benefits from what you've accumulated in retirement." So let's roll with it, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And so when we talk about retirement concerns, inflation has to be a biggie. And I know that's a big one, cost of living. And of course, it all centers around, how much money you have, because people are so paranoid about their retirement income because it's fixed. They're no longer getting a regular paycheck, right?
That's it. It is you have X amount of dollars that are spendable, and you want to spend them wisely. When you think about inflation, cost of living, we hear about these little increases. They trickle out there for Social Security or the VA benefits for veterans or what have you. But the fact is that this is the more retirees worry about inflation eroding their savings than anything else. We're talking over 90%. And I have to tell you, I feel that way. I mean, my God, go out to eat, go to the grocery store,
Right.
gas has been kind of variable, like, okay, but yeah, I mean, I've made the comment. I said, I never understood 55 and up smaller portion meals. I think about how much food you buy or how much you pay in a restaurant for a meal that I don't eat it all, and I hate like heck to throw it away because my mommy always said, eat everything on your plate because there are children in Africa starving. We've
I
all
heard
heard.
that one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even so much that like, we would take your fork and you kind of press it down on the little residues and make sure you eat that too, because without a clean plate, you didn't get dessert. And we start talking about 3 and 4% inflation, do the math, 3%, 4% inflation over 10 years, that's 30 or 40% without compounding. So that's significant. More importantly, if you're only earning 6%, and of course, yes, with the markets these days and Nvidia and all this wonderful stuff, everybody thinks they're making 30%. But if you're in a diversified portfolio, you're not making that. And hopefully, you're not taking that level of risk in retirement. But if you're making 3 or 4, you're making 6% and 3 and 4%, 50, 60% of that's being eaten up by inflation. You're not really moving ahead very well. So
Yeah.
that is why it's the concern for 90+% of retirees.
Yeah, and I know you plan for inflation, you build it into your retirement income plans, and that's so critical that people work with someone like yourself. But another thing, people often think, well, I'll get the COLA to my Social Security. That'll increase every year, and that'll help with inflation. You start laughing when I say COLA, because that cost of living increase, well, great. We don't want to, as my mom always said, look a gift horse in the mouth. We'll take it. But 2.8%. And I just read this morning that healthcare costs in 2025 have increased on average 21%. this year.
Yep.
So the 2.8, you laughed because 2.8 isn't going to cut it, is it?
Well, we have a saying whenever somebody brings up cola, I say, well, I said, here's the thing. The reason they give you a cola is so you can buy one more Coke or one more cup of coffee.
Yeah,
Call it a cola so you
yeah.
can get a Coca-Cola, and that's about all it'll do for you. So,
Right.
yeah.
And that's just, it would be one thing if it was 3% of every bit of retirement income you took for the year, but that's just on whatever your Social Security payment is. That could be anywhere from $500 a month to $2,500 a month, or $3,000 at the most. So that's not going to cut it. And I just think that's so important to plan for. Now, number 2 on the top 20 retirement concerns, I think I kind of let the cat out of the bag there with my healthcare comment, but it's healthcare costs, isn't it?
Well, it's not like it's a cat in a bag. I mean, we all know, what it costs, and and healthcare, you can't mention the word healthcare without in today talking about long-term care cost. I remember, again, sign I've been doing this for forever. I remember whenever we used to say 1 in 4 people in retirement will need some form of long-term care. I remember when that changed to 1 in 3. I remember when it went to 1 in 2. Now that's huge, I mean,
Yes.
so
Huge.
before it used to be, okay, 2 couples go out to dinner, one of you is probably going to need something. Now you just look at your spouse and go, hey, one of us is going to need some kind of long-term care. And we all want the same thing. We want to be able to have long-term care that happens in our home. If we need something, we want care in our home. We don't want taken out of our home. We don't want to be in a facility, what have you. And there's a price tag for that, and it is not inexpensive. Not as bad as inflation. 90% of retirees worried about inflation. 60% worry about healthcare as their number one financial worry.
Yeah.
And we see it manifest 2 ways. One is, okay, I'm no longer covered by my healthcare plan at work. You get people that are retiring prior to Medicare age. So how do I bridge that gap? And then, when you hit the Medicare window, it's like, okay, Medicare, but then do I need a supplement? What kind of supplement? And here's one you don't think about is it's not just whether you need a supplement or not, but it's basically where are you going to be? For people that are snowbirds, people that are in the north and come south for the winter, do you have the same access to medical care and doctors and facilities? If you pick it just for your locale and you're not going to be in that locale for a extended period of time, that becomes a factor. So all of these things come into play. I am not a Medicare supplement expert, but we have a gentleman we work with who is very well versed in it, has been doing it, about as long as I've been doing the investment side of the world. So, that's important. But the long-term care side is one that we actually build scenarios. When we build our plans, we say, okay, here's a concern. So we're going to plug in, and here's a scary one. The average, now this is in-home care. This is not at long-term care at a care facility. This is in-home care. I remember when this number would get you facility care somewhere. In-home care averages now about $6,700 a month in 2025. And it's bad enough what it costs, but I will tell you, and ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't experienced it, I say this, and I'm very vehement about this because my wife has some health issues, and it's not. I can have the best insurance in the world, but at the end of the day, what's the level of care and the quality of care that I'm getting? We have a number of clients that they give us feedback, and they're like, "Hey, we worked it out that this nurse will come 3 times a week to the house and perform a certain care option." And then you find out that they came 3 times last month whenever the doctor prescribed 3 times a week. There's a huge disconnect there. Yet they're
Yeah.
billing, so and that's the probably the biggest frustration, not just from cost, but from how, what the actual level of services and value provided is. And again, who's responsible for overseeing all of this? You are. And so
Yeah.
it is a big point of anxiety And it's something that, we do as the best we can do with planning. And, and we've been fortunate in that, we don't just do the investment side, we do the comprehensive planning. And if a client calls in and say, I'm having this problem, it's like, hey, let's make a phone call. We had a client recently that was telling us that her husband was in a home, and she's like, they're overbilling me, they're really messing things up and all that. And it's like, well, bring your stuff in, let's take a look at it. And we made a phone call and found out that, in fact, yeah, the home was doing things that were, she was being charged for things she probably shouldn't have been. So,
Mm.
yeah, it's crazy. So it's bad enough to be a financial worry, but then to be a point of anxiety. But yeah, healthcare and long-term care costs, number 2 on the hit list here.
Yeah. Well, and let's take a brief moment here to remind people about that website you have, Bruce, and the phone number they can call to set up that no charge, no obligation consultation. Like you said, you have a Medicare specialist that you can have work with them if that's an area of concern. Working out healthcare costs, because Medicare doesn't cover, there's still costs even with Medicare. People don't realize that a lot
Absolutely.
of times. And the average couple will spend over $300,000 in retirement on healthcare expenses out of pocket. So there's still premiums, deductibles, out of pocket costs. So how can people get a hold of you to get a plan in place?
We make it simple. Tony loves this number, 888-888-5601. So 888-888-5601, or discoverunlock.com. I tripped myself up there. Yeah, discoverunlock.com. That's going to take you right to our scheduling page. You'll go there and say, hey, I want to schedule for this date, this time, and we'll have a 20-minute call. And it can be a Zoom meeting, it can be a phone call, either one. We're comfortable in both spaces, and just, answer a few questions, and can we help you?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's great. Now let's keep rolling. What's next on the list of the things that people are concerned about regarding retirement?
This one has actually accelerated, and I think it's accelerated because of inflation. Just how much stuff is costing, and that is outliving your savings, longevity risk. My dad's been gone 12 years now, and I've talked to him about him on the show many times. But my dad retired in his mid-50s, disability, tore his back up working in the oil refinery, and he was always saying those darn oil companies, those darn oil companies. Now he had a pension. He lived to 93. And I'm like, Dad, you broke the bank. You helped drain their pension fund. You did good. So, people didn't have this problem when they had a pension and nothing else. They had pension and Social Security, and that was it. So they said, okay, I have X dollars coming in. This is the lifestyle that will afford me. Boom, that's it. So they weren't going to outlive their money, but now, will there be money left over for a surviving spouse? Will they still get a benefit? We still see, people in their 80s and 90s, and a husband or wife dies, and they're going, okay, now my income has shifted. But you have this lump of money, and we said last week on the show, it's not all your money. If you're in that pay taxes later program, then it's like, all right, if you want access to this money, you got to pay Uncle Sam. You got to pay to play every time you get a check from there. So people have this lump of money. Things are costing more, and they're going, hey, I'm going to outlive my savings. Will this thing zero out? Certainly, there's usually one spouse that's more concerned than the other. But longevity risk, we're living longer. Are we living better? And there's an interesting one that creeps in here. And it's funny. Notice how all of these things are looped together and tied together, because the long-term care, healthcare cost issue. Okay, so if mortality was 82, okay, so am I going to live my savings to 82? We plan to age 90, and people say, well, I'm not going to live that long. I say, well, what if you do? Let's plan to age 90. The new planning standard, like in the CFP programs and stuff, they're talking about age 120 because of the extended longevity of life.
Mm-hmm.
So but the reality is, what happens, you get to a point where you have your needs that are being met by the income, but then you have a healthcare thing that kicks in. So my lifestyle costs more due to inflation. Now I've got an extra burden of healthcare costs. So the reality of outliving your savings, longevity risk, is significant. 42% of people are fearful that they will outlive their savings. Now, how do you, just these top three, how do you resolve these? Well, you can go get a job as a Walmart greeter. That's probably not going to work. Okay. But the key is asking yourself a very simple question. What is it that I'm spending money on? And people say, "Oh, well, I'm going to the grocery store, I'm buying car insurance or whatever, property taxes." No, those are fine. Those are your lifestyle expenses. But how much money are you spending in taxes that you unnecessarily don't have to? And you can keep that money and have it available to offset inflation, offset healthcare, not outlive your money. What about the monies that you unnecessarily lose when the market goes south? If you could hold that money in your account and not lose it, where's the benefit there? On
Yeah.
the income side, we want to give you an increase every couple of years with our income guardrail system, to help offset these additional costs. So, you can find money not just through employment or additional contributions because you've stopped contributing. But let's say, we have this asset base, all this pile of money, if you will, this pile of cash. How do we get the absolute greatest value from it? And the number one value is actually increasing through tax planning. So, you wouldn't think taxes would come into the equation with inflation, healthcare, and outliving your savings, but it's probably the biggest additional funding device is more money for you, less for Uncle Sam.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, you talk about longevity risk and outliving your savings. Everything you read says, every survey says that's the number one fear retirees have is outliving their savings. And as my good buddy always told me, he always said, Tony, you don't want your blood pressure to hit zero before you don't want your bank account to hit zero before your blood pressure does. That's what he said. And
I've
so,
heard them all over the years. That
yeah,
was
yeah.
when you hit me with that one the first time. I'm like, well, there's a new one. I haven't heard that one.
But the good news is we're living longer. The bad news is we're living longer, as I like to say.
Exactly.
So that's a good one. So let's just before we end this first half of the show, let's get in one more here. What's next on the list?
Well, this one is always a fun one, and this is a moving target all the time, and that is tax burden and policy changes. The one thing you don't know is what is the future of taxes, what is the future of taxation, and that's the one thing. If you rewind the clock, if somebody's 25 years old, they're just starting to hit their earning potential, and if somebody sat down with you and said, okay, when you enroll you in this 401k, and we're recommending you pay taxes later. So we're not going to take any tax money out now. Uncle Sam's going to kind of give you a credit card with no limit, and he'll keep track of how much you owe him. So that balance that you owe him on that you Uncle Sam credit card, he'll know what it is, and he'll let you know, and you can pay that later. And you said, but you're never going to know what that future rate is, and you're never going to know how the politicians are going to react and what they're going to do, because they're always going to be the ones in control of how much of the money you've worked hard to save and accumulate and invest wisely during your lifetime. You don't get to say how much of that is yours. It's always going to be Uncle Sam. So
it's a joint account.
Yeah,
People don't realize it's a joint account with Uncle Sam. They think I've got $100,000 in my IRA or my 401k, just for an example. No, you don't. It's a joint account with Uncle Sam, and at any given time, he can change what percentage of it goes to him.
Yep. And if you want a very interesting little piece of trivia, we did this research. It was about 5 years ago. Whether you're aware of it or not, I'm not a political person. I don't do politics, but this is a very interesting little piece of research. So you do realize that when somebody holds public office, they have to disclose their finances for their household. Okay. And you can do the research and you can find out what's what. And so we researched all the people in Washington and said, okay, how much are they worth? And what kind of accounts do they have? Well, the first thing we found was how many of them don't have a lot of money, but their spouse does. So that was kind of an eye opener.
Yep.
But the really interesting one was how many of them have a bulk or all of their money in Roth accounts. So they're the ones making the rules of what you're going to pay in tax, but they've already done the advanced tax planning themselves so that they are exempted from whatever those policy changes are, from whatever their tax burden is zero. They've insulated themselves from their own nemesis craziness. So like people say, well, I need, 1.26 million to retire comfortably. It's not that I need 1.26 million, is I need 1.26 million to afford my lifestyle and the lifestyle of Uncle Sam. So how do you have the most efficient retirement possible? And it's with advanced tax planning. And
Yep.
with advanced tax planning, you don't get that elsewhere.
Exactly. And you know what? We do have to take a quick break, but taxes and healthcare, two of the biggest expenses people are going to face in retirement. I'm glad you touched on those. But before we take the break, let our listeners know once again how they can get a hold of you to set up that no charge, no obligation consultation.
Yeah, it's very simple. Pick up your phone or pull it out of your pocket, or maybe, oh my God, it's already in my hand. 888 I'm sorry, 888-888-5601, or go to discoverunlock.com on the web and set that appointment for a 20-minute no cost, no obligation, friendly consultation. You might be talking to me, you might be talking to young Bruce. I'm the better looking one, by the way, or you might be getting Chris, but one of our elite advisors will be speaking with you, and we look forward to that conversation. 888-888-5601 or discoverunlock.com.
And we'll be right back with more of Unlock Your Retirement right after this. All right. We are in segment 2 of our show now. We'll hit that hard. I'll bring us in. Here we go. Welcome back to Unlock Your Retirement. I'm your co-host, Tony Shore. I'm here with our host, the man with the plan, Bruce Smith. And of the Bruce Smiths, his son is also Bruce Smith. He claimed at the end of the last segment, he's the good-looking one. I didn't have ready at the time the laugh track, but we probably should have when he said that. We should have had the... I'm kidding.
Thanks, Tony.
Everyone knows
my buddy Tony, ladies and gentlemen.
Everyone knows Bruce is the eye candy of the show. We know that. But and the scary thing for me is he's also the brains. So and I'm just over here along for the ride. Bruce, the brains of the operation here. We've been talking about really retirement concerns or retiree concerns, the top concerns retirees have, or pre-retirees, those planning for retirement have. And you covered some of the biggest ones in our first segment. You talked about inflation, cost of living, healthcare, long-term care, and then, of course, the biggie, outliving your savings, and taxes. Where do we go from here? I mean, those are the big ones I'm familiar with. What do you want to talk about in the second
Well,
segment?
we have to actually kind of wrap taxes up, because there's two elements to the taxes. One is the taxes you will pay in your lifetime, and then there's the taxes. There's actually three: the taxes you'll pay in your lifetime if you're married, the taxes your spouse will pay when you're gone, and then finally the taxes your family will pay to inherit the wealth that you worked so hard to accumulate.
Wow.
And so when we talk about policy changes, and here's one that people just don't see, but again, we're just so immersed in it. They raised the RMD age for the required minimum distributions, and they're going, great, that's what I wanted. I didn't want to take them at 70 and a half. 73 is good, 75, whatever my number works out to be. But remember, that's that many more years of tax deferral that tax bill is swelling over time. And Uncle Sam is very good at I don't want to think anybody's this smart inside the Beltway, but when you look at the tax burden that somebody will have from their 70s, and if they live to be 90, and God, let me tell you, we sit down with so many clients in their 80s and 90s, and they tell us, Bruce, my God, I had no taxes when I retired. I'm paying 30, 40, 50 grand a year now. What is going on? And it's the RMDs. So having a tax strategy is a big deal, because for your heirs, and we find this almost religiously in planning now, if you have 3 or more children, the person who will get the biggest check from your retirement account is none of your 3 kids. It's Uncle Sam. And when people see that, they're kind of like, whoa, time out. What can we do? So, we just scheduled an appointment yesterday with a 90-year-old parent of clients of ours. and we're going over, here's what can be done now while you're alive to minimize that burden and give benefits to kids. So, that's the top three. We talked about inflation, we talked about living too long and tax burdens and everything, but Social Security, that one, obviously we hear that one all the time. It goes in hand with pension uncertainty. So I'm going to kind of lump that into the stable guaranteed incomes that you expect in retirement. Most people today don't have a pension. There are some residue ones out there, but typically people coming out of the workforce today, we are not seeing a lot of pensions. We're predominantly seeing 401ks, 403bs, things like that. So Social Security is the bell ringer as far as stable income, but it's weird, the communication we get from people as we sit down with them. We have some people that tell us, when you build my plan, I want you to put in a 0 for Social Security because I don't think it's going to be there. And we can stress test that way. There's no problem doing that. Because 76% of retirees believe the Social Security benefits are insufficient. Now, it was never meant to be about her. I'll just cut back. So let him know to edit here.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. So the first person that ever got Social Security, Mary something, she put in X and she lived to be, I think it was 95, and she got back like 3X. So it was kind of funny, but Social Security is not meant to be the sole source. It is a supplement, but it needs to be factored into your overall income plan. One thing we always tell people, we get people that they hear from another financial advisor or another financial firm, oh, hey, what's the strategy that'll give me the most money for Social Security? And I said, first of all, that's easy. I said, I can tell you how to get exactly the most pennies possible out of Social Security for you and your spouse. I just need each of you to take 2 minutes and give me one piece of information. Tell me the day you're going to die. And they look at you kind of funny. I said, it is a mathematical equation. When should you take it? How much should you take? When should you turn on the benefits? When should the husband? When should the wife? I said, if you want to get the most money, it's based on how long you live. It's a roll of the dice. If you say, I'm going to wait till I'm 70 to take it, if you drop dead at 73, that didn't work. That plan didn't work. So our advice to people is never, and I rarely use the word never, but never, look at Social Security as a standalone item on its own. It needs to be an integral part of your overall income plan. Look at all the sources, figure out how that puzzle piece fits into your income puzzle. And where does it fit? Where does it make the most sense? And it shouldn't be about the greatest dollar amount. It should also be about the greatest lifestyle value. Having more money when you're 75 or 80 years old and you're on your third hip replacement, fifth knee replacement, or whatever it is, you're probably not going to go see the Grand Canyon in the same way that you would have when you were 65. So, we look at a lifestyle value in addition to that. Social Security is a big concern. Do I think it's going to go away to a $0 income? No, I don't. I think what you're going to see is continued raising of the age to draw it. I think you're going to see tiered benefit levels based on when somebody entered the workforce and what the pot of money looked like for that generation, if you will. But remember, it is a supplement. So I think that's the key. So the uncertainty shouldn't be, it's uncertain if you look at only Social Security, but if you blend it into the overall income plan, and that's how, and then one thing we're able to do, again, notice how our planning is cohesive in that it all ties together. We have a lot of people, if you don't have a pension and we do the advanced tax planning, you can very easily find yourself down the road that you're getting your Social Security and paying 0 taxes on it. And people love that. Now, no, there's not some trick that you just turn on and 0 Social Security. It's looking at your other income, where it's coming from, and the tax treatment of it. So this is why you want an elite wealth manager, building a plan for you that's not typical of what you see. Wealthy people have had these kind of tax plans forever. It's time that you get your share because you're entitled and eligible.
Yeah. Well, it is really something because I know you have the Social Security maximization report that you can run for people, and that's based on their personal information because everybody's situation is different. And Bruce, we've talked about this before, but it's so common for people to say, "Oh, my neighbor says you got to file at 62, or my buddy at work, or my brother-in-law or brother. It's just my friend. You got to file as early as possible to get more checks, or you got to wait until 70 because that's the biggest amount." But really, you got to find your own sweet spot based on your needs and your individual situation and your spouse. So, and we're going to do whole shows on Social Security maximization. But what's next on this list when it comes to things that retirees and soon to be retirees are really concerned about?
This one is not a surprise to me for what it is, but it surprises me where it falls on the list. This is probably the number one talked about concern from the advisory side. Advisors love to talk about this and tout this, and I think this becomes a sole focus of what they're able to do for you or not do for you. And the financial industry I hold accountable for this
Yeah.
is market volatility and investment risk. And our approach to this is significantly different. This is one of those things. I was a broker for my first 10 years in the business, and my job, if you had a need, I would sell you a product to fix your need. That's what I did. But I went from being a broker all the way to vice chairman of a national investment firm in Boston. And when I got to that level, I got to work with wealthy people. And I'm talking people that had 5, 10, $20 million. And guess what? The first thing that they would tell you is, don't lose my money. And I'm kind of like, wait a second, you got to take risk. That's the market. And they're going, don't lose my money. And if you don't, you weren't there for those meetings, but this one you can reference. Google will tell you, what does Warren Buffett say the number one rule is when it comes to investing? Don't lose money. What's his second rule, Tony?
Well, I know one of his rules is it's not time in the market. It's not timing. Don't time the market. It's not timing the market. It's time in the market. Is that what
You
you're
need to
looking
read my
for?
book.
Oh,
His first rule is don't. His
okay.
first rule is don't lose money.
Yep. I knew that one.
His second
Don't.
rule is C rule number one.
Yeah. See rule number one. That's right.
C rule
Don't lose
number one.
money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
He also says don't try to time the market.
yep. So if you think about that, like here's Warren Buffett, and he's like
Yeah.
saying, don't lose money.
Right.
So, but he goes on. There's a great book that was written about Warren, and he was quoted in saying this, and he goes into he said measuring the performance of your portfolio is a good and fair and equitable number, but a more important one is risk adjusted return. Basically, what's the value you're getting for the risk that you're taking? And he said, you should never take unnecessary risk and suffer unnecessary losses. And his guideline, his thumb, I don't want to say thumb rule, his guideline for design is this: your portfolio should have more upside potential than it has downside potential. And he said, and if you have that, that'll work about perfectly in helping your returns. And that's what I learned when working with wealthy people is when you look at their portfolios, they're using wealth protection assets that are designed to give them growth opportunities for their money, but they don't lose anything if the market goes south. They use wealth preservation assets that will give them great upside potential and have minimal loss, or in some cases, no loss scenarios on the downside. And if you take those two types of elements, which are not typical, are not in most retirement plans, are not in most retirement wealth portfolios, and you have the majority, say 60% of your assets in those, and then 40% in traditional, now you have a much tighter, stronger, beneficial safety net under your investments. So the market downturn becomes significantly less of a concern, and you have more of that upside potential. And one of the things we've seen, like for example, we ran a scenario, we talk about it in the book, because we're talking about bonds and different alternatives. We said, okay, if you could have 50% of the up of the S&P 500, but none of the down. Historically, you'll find that in many scenarios, you can actually beat the normal S&P because, as a gentleman told me a long time ago, he said, when you have a loss of 30 or 40%, it's not 30 or 40% just the raw number. It's 30 or 40% of the original principal you invested and 30, 40 to 40% of all the gains you ever had on that account. So it is a big drop. And if you have $100,000 and lose 50%, you've got $50,000. If you make 50% after that, you have $75,000. And
Right.
this is what a wealthy client said to me. He said, Bruce, I never have to work the money near as hard if I didn't lose it in the first place. And that exactly is what Warren Buffett is trying to say by saying have more upside potential than downside potential. And people are surprised when they come to us and we show them returns, basically here's the upside potential, here's the downside. And they're saying, wait, you can reduce my risk 30, 40%, and I still have the same upside I had where I was or thereabouts, because it is an unknown. I don't know what the future is going to hold. But, if I'm going to bet on the future, I want that stability. And that gives you more security. So market volatility and investment risk can be mitigated without it isn't just I went to cash or I went to a low yielding CD. I used wealth preservation and wealth protection strategies for a majority of my portfolio to have the growth opportunity, but have a much broader safety net under my portfolio. And that's very important.
It's hugely important. And, market volatility has always been an issue when it comes to retirement planning. And I think now, even though there's more moving parts and it's gotten a little more complex, it's good that there are so many options out there now. I think there are more options and better options for people to protect that retirement income and have income to pull from that won't deplete during market downturns, right?
Yeah. I mean, we actually there are vehicles today that we're utilizing in portfolios. I remember back when I worked with wealthy people, there were investments that, when I looked at their portfolios and I saw what they were invested in, I'm like, "Wait, what's this? What's this? What's this?" And they were things that I had never had access to and wouldn't fit for the majority of people that I had worked with as a broker because they had minimum investments of two, three, four, $500,000 per unit. Yeah, they fit wealthy people, but they're no good for the average person because they don't have that kind of coin. Today with technology, the big investment banks and these big institutions have finally found a way. And I've been saying it, I said it for 10 years. Can you slice these into smaller pieces and give people greater access? And that's the key is, today more than ever, you have greater access to a higher level of planning, a higher quality of investments, a greater diversification element than you ever had before. But to unlock that door, to have that opportunity, you've got to have an advisor that is an elite wealth advisor. There's 300,000 advisors in this country. The top 1% represents about 3,000 advisors. How do you know you're working with one of them? How do you know, or where would you find one of them? And the answer is in the planning. If when we sit down with somebody, if we do a plan for somebody, and we do a plan for every person that becomes a client, we say, look, if we can show you massive additional value that we can unlock, that's why the show is called Unlock Your Retirement. If we can show you that value and you be the judge of that, would you seriously consider using us as your wealth manager going forward? And when we show them the plan and they're like, wait a minute, I'm saving this much in taxes. You reduce my risk 30%. I've got an income increase plan because of the income guardrail. And you just shaved off $230,000 that was going to go to Uncle Sam that now stays with my heirs after I'm gone. And you erased the widow tax trap for my spouse. There's 5 things that my current plan didn't have. Yes, I would love to work with you. So we earn it. We've got to create value. And if we can't, we're going to validate what you're doing in the plans that we design and say, hey, you're pretty good. And we have a couple of those every year, and people are shocked. They're like, so I don't move my money to you? I'm like, no, there's no reason to move your money to us. You're within the guardrails. You're in good shape. And they love that vindication. So we're very objective.
Yeah, but it is good to get that second opinion. And I really think discoverunlock.com is the address, right? Where people can go set that consultation. Now, what's the next big one on the list of concerns retirees face?
Well, in a word, the concern is confidence. How confident are you that your retirement planning is going to get you from A to B? We talked about it, I think it was last week on the show, is that, we have a lot of self-directed people that come to us and they become clients because they're like, hey, I can design an investment portfolio, or I can use online tools or Fidelity, Vanguard, whatever, but I don't have a comprehensive plan. I don't have something that is a bona fide plan that says, here's how we're going to manage the taxes. Here's how we're going to increase income. Here's how we're going to benefit the transfer of wealth to our heirs. I don't have those elements, and the value of those elements is significant. Typically, tax planning being the biggest value increaser. So they're not confident, but they're like, how do you resolve the confidence? And you can't do it without a plan. A thumb
Right.
roll is not going to do it. It's just an empty conversation is not going to do it. Buying a product is not going to do it. It's having a comprehensive plan. And when you build that planning and you show it to them, the one thing, which again is a product of 40 years of doing this, believe it or not, at the end of the day, the plan that we end up presenting to people is a page and a half. It all comes down to basically, here's A, here's B, here's what changed in these 4 categories. And people love that. They're not going to get lost in the minutiae. It's not going to give them an oversized migraine. It's complex. Let us do what we do best, but here's the end result of what we're looking at, and here's how we got there.
Excellent. Well, and that's true. You want to have confidence. You want to make sure you've got enough planning and you have a plan in place. A lot of people think they might have a plan, but a 401k or an IRA, that's not a plan. You need an actual plan that is going to let you know, here's what we're going to do. And that's where you come in. I think that is so important. So that's a good one. And that's a kind of a given. I think. What's another concern though that you see out there that people have?
Oh man, it all starts to flow together eventually, but kind of along with the healthcare one, and this is one we're seeing more and more. And I have to tell you, this is a hard one for us. Is health decline and cognitive decline. People are saying, look, yes, we did a plan, or we have a plan, but are my documents in order? If my spouse has to start taking care of doing the taxes or getting a hold of the insurance guy, do I have a power of attorney? The power of attorney one is one that is missed. Wills, people, I have a will. Most of them are 15 years old and they got dust on them and they're written on papyrus.
Haven't been updated. There's been marriages, divorces, births, and deaths, and the will hasn't been updated. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you have the will, but you have the advanced medical directive, the living will, you have the power of attorney, all of these things. We had a client call in one time, actually his wife called in and said, hey, I just want to let you know he had a stroke. I'm like, oh, okay. She said, so I have some questions about his IRA. And I said, well, I can't talk to you about that. Do you have a power of attorney? What's that? No, we don't have.
No.
Oh yeah, and this happens more than you know. And thank God he kind of came out of it. He was cognizant. He was able to do a power of attorney, get it notarized and everything. So, documents were able to be created, but it's not always that way. And the alternative would have been you have to you have to get an attorney, go to the judge, say, get me filed as their guardian or whatever it is, so I can start taking care of affairs. But health decline is one thing. Cognitive decline is another one, and these are things that nobody talks about. But we see more than I care to admit. We had a gentleman had a couple $1 million with us, and one day we got a call from a fencing company. Hey, we just wanted to verify funds. This guy wants to buy 2.5 miles of high tensile fence, and I'm kind of going, I know where he lives. I know how big his property is. You could do it with about 100 yards of high tensile fence. Where's this going? And he was just doing things, and he was doing it for a farmer friend of his, and it's like, no, we're not doing that. And I couldn't verify with them anyway. But we see where people are slipping. I mean, I hate to say that. And the hard part is, so we do a document now called a trusted. Basically, it's a trusted person that you identify and say, hey, I'm okay with you discussing my stuff with them. So if somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm 80 years old. I've always driven a Chevy Spec, but I'm going to go buy a new Ferrari. Okay. So, and that scene with Dustin, or not, Al Pacino when he was
Oh,
blind, he was
yes.
driving the Ferrari, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I can just picture that. But the, cognitive decline, is there somebody else we can talk to and just get, hey, does this sound copacetic, or do you want to go have a talk with them? Because it's very hard to do. We as the advisor, we have to act on the wishes and instructions of our clients. And it's amazing that the number of clients that have said, hey, no, I absolutely would love to do that form. So you can reach out to my son, my daughter, my neighbor, my friend, my coworker, whoever. I trust them enough to at least come knock on my door and sit down and have a conversation with me and say, hey, is everything okay? So the expanse of what we do has broadened, and we're glad to do it, and we're excited to do it. But health and cognitive decline is a big one. Yeah, there's a lot of other ones, but those are some of the biggies.
Yeah. Well, I think we actually have time for one more, Bruce, and it really it is what you were talking about. So we might as well knock this one out, and that's estate and beneficiary transfer risk. You do a lot of enhanced planning, estate planning, legacy planning. There are many things, words, and it's somewhat different, but tell us about that. That's a big concern that people have, and maybe they're not concerned enough. This is something people put off, isn't it?
Well, some put it off, but a lot of people don't see it as significant till you put a number to it. So
Sure.
the first thing that I want to disarm out there in the public that are listening is, I hate the term estate planning, because as soon as I hear estate planning, it's like, oh, that's for rich millionaires, and that's not me. And that's true. Estate planning of the federal income tax, federal estate tax level doesn't impact hardly any of the listeners out there. But what you do have is you have the beneficiary transfer risk. Basically, remember, you made a deal with Uncle Sam, and you probably made it through a financial advisor that opened a 401k or an IRA or whatever it was, and you said, I'll pay taxes later. Uncle Sam doesn't say, okay, well, when you're gone, that obligation goes away. You don't have to, I made the deal with you, you died, that goes away. No, if it is tied to every dollar in that retirement account, whoever receives it will receive the taxation. So, and we're going to say something here that most people don't ever even think about. And when we run these numbers, it is scary, Tony. What really happens? People live to be what? 80, 85. All right. How old are their kids at that point? 65. So children end up inheriting a retirement account with mandatory distributions, heavy mandatory distribution rates, dumping in taxable income on them at the worst possible time. And it can
Yeah.
screw up their retirement.
Yeah, usually between 55 and 65, that's going to happen. And that's either their highest earning years or when they're just hitting retirement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we sit down and say, look, this is the tax cost of transferring this wealth, should a death occur at 80, 85, 90, and we do it year by year. You can see it. We say, with our planning, here's how we're able to whittle that down and maybe even get it to zero by the time they're 80. And say, if you die at any point past that, your spouse will get this money 100% tax free. Your kids will get it tax free, and they can continue to grow it for 10 years, income tax free, take it all out, and have no tax burden whatsoever because you were prudent with having an advanced tax plan. So beneficiary transfer risk is poor planning really slices away the inherited wealth to where it doesn't go to your family, it doesn't go to the people you want. So it's a big deal, and it's part of the integral planning in all that we do.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're out of time for today's show. It was a great one. We packed a lot of information into this one, Bruce. A lot was covered. So I hope our listeners will call you with any questions. You're offering that no charge, no obligation consultation. So give that phone number and web address one more time for our listeners before we go.
Absolutely. We'd love to have a conversation with you. If something here was disturbing, you go, hey, what about that? How does it affect me? Or what does that mean? 888-888-5601 or discoverunlock.com.
All right. And that does it for today's episode of Unlock Your Retirement with our host, Bruce Smith.